How breastfeeding benefits mothers' health. Feeding infants with breast milk has been shown to improve baby health and even IQ, but the benefits of breastfeeding also appear to stay with mothers for years to come, lowering risks of cardiovascular disease and cancer. The benefits of breast milk for babies are numerous. Lower rates of childhood obesity, decreased incidence of asthma, and even better brain development are all linked with drinking more of mother's milk in infancy. And despite decades of research and promising marketing claims, the formula industry has not caught up to Mother Nature in the milk department. But even if technicians could develop a better food for infants, researchers are now realizing that skipping the lactation phase would be problematic for mothers' health. In fact, not breastfeeding after giving birth seems to put women at higher risk for breast and ovarian cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and many other serious health conditions. The mechanisms behind these increased risks are still being sorted out, but researchers think that by not engaging in the process that the body prepares for during pregnancy, many crucial systems can go out of whack. And the effects can last for decades after children are weaned. The normal physiology is breastfeeding after pregnancy, says Allison Stube, an assistant professor in the Division of Maternal Fetal Medicine at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, who describes breastfeeding as the fourth trimester of pregnancy. When women cannot or choose not to breastfeed, there are myriad consequences, and we're just figuring them out, she says. Costs of not nursing. About 85% of U.S. women have at least one child, and based on information about the virtues of breast milk for all those babies, most health agencies recommend that when biologically possible and safe, women breastfeed infants exclusively for the first 6 months with the option of introducing complementary foods in addition to breast milk through 12 months. Almost 3/4 of women in 2005, the latest year for which data are available, started breastfeeding their infants shortly after birth. By 6 months, however, only 42% of women were still feeding their babies any breast milk at all, with 12% still feeding exclusively breast milk at that point. Considering the improved health outcomes for the infants alone, the U.S. could save about $13 billion each year on medical costs if 90% of women nursed their infants exclusively for the first 6 months, according to an analysis led by Melissa Bartik of the Department of Medicine at Cambridge Health Alliance and Harvard Medical School, published March 2010 in the journal Pediatrics. And that sum says nothing of the money that might be saved on health costs for mothers if they breastfed, which Bartik estimates would be significant. In a study of data from 139,681 postmenopausal women in the U.S., those who breastfed for less than 12 months during their reproductive years had a higher risk for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hyperlipidemia, and hypertension than women who had lactated for more than a year in total. For example, among women who had children, those who did not breastfeed had a 42.1% chance of developing hypertension, where mothers who breastfed for at least 12 months had a 38.6% chance, according to an analysis led by Eleanor Schwartz, an assistant professor of medicine, obstetrics, gynecology and reproductive sciences at the University of Pittsburgh, and published May 2009 in Obstetrics and Gynecology. For women who never become pregnant, many of their risks seem to be closer to those who have children and breastfed. Mobilizing mother's fat. Those breastfeeding benefits accrue in part because nursing can start to break down some of the fat that accumulates in women's bodies during pregnancy. At first, some mothers despair for their figures because having children generally leads to thicker midsections and thighs as women's bodies change to nourish a developing fetus and boost stores for feeding the baby once it is born. Although not optimal for long-term health, this extra weight serves an important evolutionary function. Clearly, the woman's body is positioning itself to be able to put out an extra meal for another body, and it just takes saving calories, Schwartz explains. Producing milk for a single infant requires about 480 extra calories a day. Various analyses have come back with different information of the ability of breastfeeding to help women slim down more quickly after pregnancy. New research presented in March from Schwartz and Candice McClure, a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Pittsburgh's Department of Epidemiology, found that women who had not breastfed had an average of about 7.5 additional centimeters of fat around their waists, as gleaned from cord scans. But as Schwartz points out, not all body fat is created equal. The fat that tends to accumulate during pregnancy is in part visceral fat, which sits around organs in the midsection and can put people more at risk for heart and other types of diseases. Their cohort study also found that, of the 351 women aged 45 to 58, those who had children and not breastfed had 28% more visceral fat than those who had consistently breastfed. Lactating women appear to be better at mobilizing these new fat stores than new mothers who are using formula. And not shedding those extra post-pregnancy pounds may put women at risk for complications in later pregnancies as well as metabolic syndrome and related health problems, Stubb and colleagues noted in a January 2009 review article published in the American Journal of Perinatology. One big concern about these additional fat stores is their potential role in upping chances for diabetes later in life. Pregnancy itself can decrease glucose tolerance and raise insulin resistance, hence the prevalence of gestational diabetes. But research is accumulating to suggest that the process of lactation works to re-establish the balance of these key sensitivities. According to a cohort analysis by Stubb et al., the longer a woman had lactated during her reproductive years, the less likely she was to get type 2 diabetes, regardless of BMI, which can be a risk factor for the disease. Women who develop gestational diabetes are generally thought to be at higher risk for developing regular diabetes later in life. But new research has shown that this increased risk is significantly lessened for women who breastfeed for more than 9 months, Schwartz points out. She adds that being able to tell women who have had gestational diabetes that breastfeeding will lower their chances of getting diabetes later has given her and many of her patients renewed hope for their future health. Helping heart health. Breastfeeding helps mothers' cardiovascular health in very specific ways, Schwartz found in her analysis of postmenopausal women. Women who reported longer histories of lactation had significantly lower rates of risk factors for cardiovascular disease, even after adjusting for socio-demographic and lifestyle variables, family history and BMI category, Schwartz and her colleagues concluded in their May 2009 analysis. In fact, those who had breastfed for more than 12 months were about 10% less likely to develop cardiovascular disease compared with women who had not breastfed. Recent research has shown aortic calcification, a risk factor for stroke, heart attack and other cardiovascular complications, was significantly more likely to be found in mothers who had not breastfed than in those who had for at least 3 months, even after adjusting for lifestyle, family history, socioeconomic status, BMI and other health issues, according to a study led by Schwartz that was published in January 2010 in Obstetrics and Gynecology. Schwartz and others are still trying to figure out why not nursing might lead to hardened arteries and other cardiovascular risk factors. One possible explanation hinges on cholesterol levels, which increase during pregnancy. For mothers who do not breastfeed, levels of triglycerides seem to take longer, by about 3 months, to reach pre-pregnancy levels. Nursing mothers also seem to have higher levels of high-density lipoprotein, HDL, or so-called good cholesterol, while they were breastfeeding. But these shorter-term effects do not entirely clear up some of the questions surrounding heart disease later in life. Better long-term heart health for breastfeeding mothers might stem in part from blood pressure, which was significantly higher in mothers who had not breastfed than in those who had, 120 mm of mercury and 115 mm of mercury, respectively, according to the 2010 Schwartz study. Research has suggested that 1 in 29 cases of postmenopausal hypertension could be avoided if mothers breastfed for at least 12 months during their reproductive years. Risks for cardiovascular disease in lactating versus non-lactating mothers seem to be firm regardless of BMI, which is usually a factor for both conditions. This finding indicates that lactation does more than simply reduce a woman's fat stores, Schwartz and her colleagues wrote in their May 2009 paper. They proposed that hormonal stimulation is likely playing a substantial role. The neurotransmitter oxytocin, which is released during nursing, seems to help women get to that blissed-out state many women have while breastfeeding, Stubb says. And this relaxed state of mind can help women cope with all the stresses that go with being a new mom. Simply getting the body in the habit of releasing this hormone by frequent nursing can pay off long after weaning. Moms who breastfeed over long times get really good at releasing oxytocin at other times, which activates the parasympathetic nervous system and can help alleviate stress later in life, Stubb says. Cutting chances of cancer. Perhaps the most well-known maternal benefit of breastfeeding is reduced risks for breast and ovarian cancers. New research is underscoring that link and shedding new light on some of the ways in which not nursing puts some women at higher risk. For every 12 months a woman breastfed, her risk of breast cancer dropped 4.3%, Stubb and Schwartz noted in a 2010 Journal of Perinatology paper. Scientific American is part of Nature Publishing Group, and for women who have a family history of breast cancer, breastfeeding seemed to decrease the risk of getting it, according to an analysis of data from more than 60,000 women led by Stubb, published August 2009 in the Archives of Internal Medicine. Whereas the potent drug tamoxifen can reduce risk for those with a mother or sister who had breast cancer by about half, moms who had breastfed at all had about 60% less risk, Stubb says. That's a pretty significant statistic, she adds. The mechanisms behind these statistics remain unclear. Women who had taken medication to suppress lactation also seem to have a lower risk of developing breast cancer compared with women who gave birth but did not breastfeed, according to recent research by Stubb and colleagues, though these drugs have questionable safety records. These findings hint that the changes in breasts that become engorged with milk that is not expressed could up the chances for breast cancer down the road. Ovarian cancer risk also appears to be partially tied in with breastfeeding. When compared with women who had breastfed for at least 18 months, mothers who never breastfed had a 1.5-fold increased risk of developing ovarian cancer, according to one analysis. Another study, published November 2009 in Cancer Causes and Control, found that the protective effect of lactating on ovarian cancer was strongest if women had breastfed their last child. One hypothesis for the ovarian cancer connection is that small infections that often occur during breastfeeding, known as mastitis, might serve to protect the body against tumors in the future. Antibodies that develop to fight the mastitis would persist in the body, and corollary evidence has shown that women who breastfed but did not have these antibodies were more likely to develop ovarian cancer than those who breastfed and did have the antibodies. Assessing limitations. Although knowledge on the health rewards of breastfeeding only seems to be growing, many of these apparently protective effects do seem to diminish with time. In Schwartz's study of postmenopausal women, those aged 60 to 69 were only significantly less likely to get cardiovascular disease than those who had formula-fed if they had lactated for a total of 13 to 23 months, according to the analysis published last May. And women who were 70 to 79 years old appeared to be at about the same risk for cardiovascular disease as their formula-feeding compatriots, regardless of how much they had breastfed during their younger years.